Oh, okay. I'm Ulrike Schaede. I'm a professor of Japanese business at the University of California, San Diego, at the School of Global Policy and Strategy. I studied Japan and have dedicated my entire research career to the study of Japanese business and economy. I actually grew up in Germany, and I got into Japan when Japan was in the bubble years, the roaring, sort of bubble economy. And in the early 2000s, I got interested in excellent Japanese companies because we had so many bad analyses, and Japan is down, and the Ice Age, and the lost decades. And I got interested in companies that were doing exceedingly well in those hard times. One of the main findings of this research is that the 3 lost decades were not lost, or at least not all lost. In fact, for the leading companies in Japan, there were a period of transformation. And the results are beginning to show now. We see it in the stock market, we see it in Japan's role in the global economy. So it's time to take another fresh look at Japanese business. So it alliterates, and so caring. I was looking for a word that describes a different type of capitalism from what we see in the United States, which has become sort of a global standard, where profit above everything, is what matters, and shareholder value is all that matters, and there's a dog-eat-dog quality to that. And we all know that America is hurting now, and so there's a search for alternatives. And without a major design, just for what it is, I believe Japan has found an alternative path. And this alternative is a system of capitalism that is somehow able to balance economic growth with social stability, technological progress with sustainability, and also the arrival of technology with human well-being. And I think some of that has gotten lost in the US and is beginning to get lost elsewhere, including in Japan. And so this is a moment to look at what Japan and Japanese businesses are doing and take a new lens to understand why Japan has been moving so slowly, which is something that it is often accused of. So the first decade after the bubble burst, so the 1990s, were in fact a really difficult time in Japan. And the reaction to that crisis was that companies were held back in the speed with which they could reform. And it wasn't that there was one person that did that. It was that the law was such that it was difficult to lay off people, similar to Europe, but a little bit different in the Japanese setting. And there was also a reputation effect. Companies that dismissed people would face the challenge of possibly, experiencing a consumer backlash. So companies were treading very carefully, and that took a lot of, so the transformation that was needed took a lot of time. And I remember vividly in those years that the public outcry about corporate behavior was not that they were slow. It was that they were hiring temporary workers instead of lifetime employees. So there you have an expression of the public wanted slow. They wanted lifetime employment to be preserved through these hard times. The hard times actually were kind of over in the early 2000s, and there was a moment for these, what I call the front runners, to start changing. And there's another reason why there took a lot of time. These companies were very large and complex. And even in the United States, a couple decades ago, it took IBM 10 years to pivot. And so for Hitachi to take 10 years to pivot is just very normal. Right? Now, from the American perspective, this took very long. And so there were all kinds of American pundits who claimed that Japan was stagnant and lost and all of that. And my response to that is, slow is not stagnant. And steady does it, right? We have a saying for that steady can also, it just takes longer. So indeed, the way I phrased this is it's a trade-off. And slow is the price. With slow I mean slow change, therefore stagnant or whatever, very low GDP growth was the price that Japan was willing to pay to preserve social stability during a period of great transformation. The way I designed that research project that I'm currently writing about, I had a strong focus on manufacturing, simply because that made it easier to compare data. There are front runners in non-manufacturing industries, but allow me to talk about manufacturing for a moment, and then maybe we can go to the non-manufacturing side. Japan has long had core competencies in, of course, assembly and the Toyota production system and the whole theory that goes behind that, and in what in Japan, of course, is called monozukuri, the ability to make very complex things at a very high level of quality and yield. And the other advantage that plays into what I observe is Japan's leadership in the chemical industry, especially as it comes to materials and very complex and difficult chemical solutions needed for manufacturing. And so what I see right now is that there are a lot of Japanese companies that have very high market shares, global market shares, in input materials, for example, in semiconductor production. Things that you would never know about unless you're a semiconductor expert. You might not know about photoresist or the mask that goes into the machine or the very complicated material that is needed to package the semiconductor once it's produced and before it can actually function. And at these ends of the semiconductor production, there are a number of Japanese chemical companies that have dominant global market shares. And they get better, and they keep getting better and better. And as a result of that, there are now trade dependencies within Northeast Asia, because Japan makes sort of the materials that then go to Taiwan and South Korea for part production, and then that goes to China for consumer end product assembly, and then that's sold in the United States. So, chemistry and chemicals and materials is a very good example for what I'm talking about, but it's not the only one. Construction machinery, one of my kind of outstanding examples right now is Hitachi. And I don't know whether they will be successful in the end or not, but what they're doing is very interesting. They're doing a real pivot away from a large conglomerate that was doing everything from rice cookers to nuclear power plants towards a smart city connector. I'm not even sure they have a good word for it. I don't have a good word for it, but there's something about smart city and energy and communication and transportation, and there's a new sort of focus and vision around being that one thing. And so they've exited rice cookers and hard disk drives and all of that, and they have instead pivoted into more leadership in sort of the connectivity of it all, and with their Lumada system, and then also the trains, of course, are very important for the smart city, transportation, right, and connectivity in terms of communication and IoT and Industry 4.0 and that sort of thing. So that's a great example, and of an ongoing pivot in what I call the Mai no Umi strategy, which refers to sumo of the early 90s, who was known as the department store of techniques. There's in other industries, not just in chemistry or transportation, but of course those are the ones that Japan has long been known for. Parts of the iPhone would not work. No cell phone, not just the iPhone. No telephone in this world would work without Japanese technology. What's interesting about this pivot is that it's difficult to see. So it used to be that Japan was quite visible. You would walk into somebody's living room and it's a Sony, right? It's a Panasonic, right? Or whatever it was called then. There were lots of Panasonic, brands. And today you walk into somebody's living room and it's not Japanese. So many people conclude from that Japan has lost it. I am saying it took Panasonic and Sony way too long to get out of the living room and indeed do this pivot upstream where they are now making things that are powering whatever it is that we see in the end product. And I call that the Japan Inside pivot. I don't know whether you remember, it's probably still the case, if you bought a Wintel machine, right, the Windows computer, it had a little sticker on it, Intel inside. There's no sticker that says Japan inside on your cell phone, your car, your thermostat, your toothbrush, your microwave. And yet, all of these things would actually not work without some Japanese input technology or production machinery or material to bond the semiconductor. And so Japan Inside is everywhere, but we don't have stickers to show that. So there's nothing Japanese about the Mai no Umi strategy. I just labeled it after a Japanese sumo wrestler because I was studying Japan. The larger implication of the strategy is that as countries develop and become technology leaders, they will have to move upstream or downstream because the arrival of, in the case of Japan, the arrival of South Korea and Taiwan and then China in the assembly space of the global value chain meant there's no more profit to be made there. Right? And that's true for German companies and Dutch companies and Swiss companies, all the same. And indeed, we see that. Right? We some of us may remember Philips in the Netherlands as a company that made bulbs and extension cords and kitchen utensils, and they don't, right? They do medical instruments and, very complicated things. And so this pivot towards the higher, the high tech, the difficult to make, difficult to copy part of the value chain, I think is something that we see in Europe as well. And the learning there might just be that it takes time to do that if you want to do it the right way with without the American, the cowboy approach would be you let a company go bankrupt and let a startup kind of fill that gap, but that's wasteful in so many ways. So it takes time, and I think the learning there is how can we, or sort of the think piece is how can we design a new system of capitalism that allows companies to do this in a methodical, deliberate way that protects the company's intellectual property and assets and allows the company to switch into becoming a new type of competitor. And I think Europe actually has a little bit of that already. The labor protection is very strong here. And sometimes what I hear in Europe is that, our labor protection is so strong we can't do anything. But I think that's not quite the right attitude. You can pivot. You just have to take your employees with you. right? And design a new system around where to put that talent. So, I would say there's a minor pivot in all companies, and maybe the Japanese experience and the European experience is closer than we might think.